Welcome to our second class for biblical finances. I'm really excited for this. It's been fun for me to prep and prepare for these things. And so I'm actually going to hand it off to Bruce to kick us off for the kind of spiritual message portion. And then I'll come back with kind of the practical, heavy side. So get ready.
See, I think, part a scripture, I think it was the first one I thought of when Brian talked about doing this was Matthew 6. If you guys want to turn there, Matthew 6:31 through 33. It says, "So do not worry, saying, what shall we eat, what shall we drink, or what shall we wear? For the pagans run after all these things, and your heavenly Father knows that you need them. But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well." So, you think about seeking first his kingdom, that's can be a lot of things, what is it like? What does it mean to seek God's kingdom? So let's just flip over quick. I just got a couple scriptures. I thought of Matthew 13:44. This guy went after the kingdom with everything he had, which is intense. And in Matthew 13:44, it said, "The kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in the field. When a man found it, he hid it again. And then in his joy went and sold all he had and bought that field." Once again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant looking for fine pearls. When he found one of great value, he went away and sold everything he had and bought it. So how much is the kingdom worth to this guy? Everything. This is like an investment scripture if you think about it too. He just sold everything and bought that field. That's the kingdom of heaven. That's how important it was to him. He's going to sell it all, no questions. I'm done. I'm going for this. This is it. I'm putting all of my resources into the kingdom. So, how valuable is the kingdom to you guys? Yeah, it is people. It's spending time with people, it's serving and all that. I'm not discounting any of that. Just trying to separate a little bit of the financial portion that it could be. So, my thing is invest in the kingdom. Invest your money in the kingdom. None of us would be here if some people down in Phoenix in the Southwest didn't invest in the kingdom, right? They gave a lot of money and resources, and we got to have Brian and Abby and everybody else. So, seeking first the kingdom to me is also pouring your finances into the kingdom when you can and how you can. Or just the thoughts on that, in Matthew 6:33, it says, "Seek first the kingdom," and kind of God takes care of everything else. He's got a way of doing that. I think when I go study the Bible with someone or I go serve someone, after I'm done, and my problems just don't seem to be as big as they were when I was, maybe self-focused or thinking about all that before. It just God kind of has a way of taking care of things, and He'll do that for us. Such as a conviction I had on that. The other scripture is Genesis 4:3-7. And it's Cain and Abel. Most of us know the story. So I read through this and got to thinking about it, and I think this is the first giving scripture. I think Merle confirmed it is the first giving scripture in the Bible where, Abel gives back to God. So let's just read it real quick. It says, "In the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord, and Abel also brought an offering, fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering he did not look with favor. So Cain was very angry, and his face was downcast. And then the Lord said to Cain, 'Why are you so angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door, and its desires to have you. You must rule over it.'" So they both gave, you read through this, they both gave offerings. They were both giving, right? But the Lord looked on favor of Abel's offering because he gave fat portions, which in the day, a fat portion was the best stuff. Now I throw away all the fat, and I like to cook my meat without that. I don't want the fat. But anyway, the fat was good in those days, and he gave the fat. And it doesn't say exactly what Cain did, but he also gave. And the Lord just didn't look at it with favor like he did in Abel. But, Cain could have been fine, but his attitude went the other way. He got so-focused. He could have probably said, okay, God, tell me about giving or whatever. He just didn't have that heart. So just think, God stuck this right in the beginning of the Bible about giving. So he must think it's pretty important. And so right from the beginning, they both gave. We talked about how God looked at it, but I think the fact that Abel gave off the top, gave the fat, gave the best off the top, and I think, when I look at our budget, Rachel and I, we have our budget is our salary, and the next line down, first expense, is our tithe, what we're giving. That's our first thing. It's not, car, house, and then on the bottom. Maybe it doesn't mean a lot, but to me, it's just like, okay, I want to give the first. Make sure I set aside that for God, and then the rest I'm going to live off of. First, I'm going to give God his portion. I'm going to live off the rest. So just some thoughts on that. I think, seeking first the kingdom and giving back to God is really where we need to start, a lot in our spiritual walk. So thank you, guys. That's all I had.
Yeah, I love that. I think I'm really challenged, not only as Bruce said, it's pretty early into the scriptures there, but I'm really challenged with the idea of that they both gave. Cain's wasn't looked on maybe with favor. And then his response. Like, I think for so many of us, maybe you haven't necessarily, I don't know, maybe you can't necessarily feel proud of kind of your investment into the kingdom at this time. I think a lot of us can. I mean, we're here on the mission team. We're serving God. I think we can be so proud. But if you don't feel proud, if you don't feel like, wow, I feel like God's looking favorably on my offering, you don't have to do and follow the rest of Cain's story. Right. You can, as Bruce said, simply just ask God, like, hey, teach me, help me. How can I grow in this? How can I learn? How can I become a better steward, invest more into God's kingdom? And I just really love that perspective because, I think I don't think I'd ever really thought about like, hey, actually both of them gave. It was just their response, God's response, but then Cain's response is definitely just that left turn that we don't want to go down. And so, as I said, I'm going to give the kind of the practicals for tonight, and hopefully you got the opportunity to think through the practicals from last week's about budgeting, living up beneath your means, and then giving to God. And so hopefully you're able to do that. Hopefully, if you needed to, you spent some time to go over and rework your budget, take a new look at it. And so we're going to continue on with kind of the next three practicals in our how to be good stewards. Actually, before I get there, this is actually kind of interesting. We all view money very differently. And I wanted to bring this up, and because Abby and I view money very differently. And this is one of the many different images you can find on the internet of how people view money differently. You got the saver, the spender, the wannabe saver at the bottom left who just ends up spending all of it anyways. You've got the gambler, the warrior, the indifferent, and with the compulsive moneymaker, right? And typically I don't use those, but with Abby and I, we view money very differently. And all of us do. I know for Abby, she views money typically as a form of security. I, for the most part, view money as opportunity. Where she has sometimes a very scarcity mindset, I have a very abundance mindset. Which, if you are on the extreme of any one of those, or kind of any one of these, it's probably not that great to have. There needs to be balance. There needs to be, what's the proverb say? A man of extremes is... I can't think of how the proverb ends. Look it up on your own. But it's basically sharing the idea of like being on the extremes isn't beneficial. It's not good for you. And so for some of us, maybe it is your spouse, your significant other can help balance you. If you don't have that though, you have to find others in your life who can help pour you back in from some of these extremes. And so you might be more with Abby and see it as security. You might be more as me seeing it as opportunity. You might see it as a way to have status. You might see it as something else. The goal here is to one, view it as God's money, be the steward, but to not be on any extreme, but to have balance in our financial life. I feel like I have to say this as we get into the topics for today. I am not a financial advisor. I am not your financial advisor. It is up for you to do your own research and make decisions on. Cool. Amen. That goes for next week too. We're going to talk about debt real quick. Proverbs 22:7, it says, "The rich rule over the poor, and the borrower is slave to the lender." And there's so many ways you can go about this, but my favorite thought is God rescued Israel from slavery. He has rescued us from slavery. Let's not put ourselves back into slavery. Maybe not with our sin, but maybe in our finances. And so, I know if you're watching online, I am not keeping up with the slides. I apologize. And again, these are my thoughts on it. I think others might agree, they might have some differences, but I just decided, hey, you know what, let's list out some types of debt and categorize them between good, okay, and poor. Typically people think a mortgage is a good type of debt. It's a good investment. Okay, and I put if needed, are like school loans, business loans, medical debt, car loans. Like some of those you might come across, you might need to have. And that's okay, as long as you do it wisely. As long as you don't, outrageously break some of the, I'm going to share some rule of thumbs when it comes to finances. And again, these aren't necessarily biblical rules of thumbs. These are just financial pieces of wisdom that are out there. And so, again, I put if needed. A medical debt might come up. If you got to go to the hospital, you need to go to the hospital. And you'll have to figure that out. Some of us, hey, we need a car to get to work. Biking in the snow. Daniel, I don't know how you do it. It doesn't always work for the majority of us. Right? So you might need a car loan, and that's okay. But if you notice, In the poor category, I not only have credit cards and payday loans as being poor or bad debt, but I also have all of the above. Because any type of loan, any type of debt can be poor debt if it's not done well. If you aren't wise, if you aren't paying it back on time, if you aren't, if your debt doesn't match up your income, things like that, right? Yeah. You gotta be careful at that. And so I have here some rules of thumb that, are out there in the financial world. They're not laws. They are not necessarily mandated that even if you went outside of them, it's not terrible. You can work through it. But I wanted to give you guys some rules of thumb so that if you're looking at your life, or if you're making a big purchase in the future, if you have somebody else you might be advising, you guys have some tools now to hopefully guide people or guide yourself. The school debt should not exceed 1 year of expected salary. That's kind of like an old rule. And honestly, I put that 8% there because that's kind of the new rule. 8% of your expected salary should be the max going back to pay off the loan. But I think the 1 year expected salary is just much easier to understand because I think, and there are so many ways around it. It just, if you talk to people who have school loans, it's a burden that can take so long to pay off, especially if your salary isn't going to match up, or your expected salary isn't going to match up with your future. And so these are not in any specific order. Get rid of credit card if you have a bad habit of debt. That's just a good rule of thumb. Like if you have habits of going, especially into credit card debt, might be a good idea to get rid of the credit cards. If you want to talk more about that, you can talk to Bruce or I or Merle on like, hey, I don't know if this really applies to me. Just another rule of thumb. Car, pay cash if you can. But if you are going to finance, there's this financial rule called 24/10. What it means is 20% down over a 4-year term, only 10% of your income should be going to your car payment and insurance. Again, it's just a good way to kind of think about, all right, hey, is this feasible for me? Is this where I'm at? Again, if you can pay cash for things, we're going to talk about that in the next category of saving and having what did I call them? Having a sinking fund for things. We'll get into that. But if you can do that, do it. And then, if you ever are buying a house or paying a car, put 20% down if you can. Always, if that's possible, especially with the house. You can get rid of PMI. Abby and I didn't put 20% down, but we bought out the PMI. It's kind of just we were planning on, but then things went sideways with our lender, so we had to pull it back a little bit. Sorry, moving on. There's a quote by somebody on why debt is bad, and I tweaked it so it would fit on one line on the slide. But the quote is, "It's hard enough to pay for life now and the future. Don't also pay for the past." And I just really like it because that's exactly what's happening when you're paying off debt. You're trying to also pay for the past, and it's really difficult to pay for the life you're living now and hopefully saving for retirement or the future or future expenses, maybe not retirement, when you're paying for the past. I threw out some quick steps, maybe not quick, but steps you can take to start your kind of debt repayment plan. If you haven't done this, list out all your debt. Create a debt repayment plan. Have something written down on paper of what your plan is. You can do the momentum method. I think that's also been called the snowball method. You can do the high interest first plan, which is kind of technically the mathematical way to do it. But if you've ever listened to Dave Ramsey, it's not about the math. Math doesn't really play a lot into this. It's like 5% math, he says. The rest is your attitude. But then step 3, if you're in debt, do your best to not add more debt. Don't become a slave anymore. And then when it's time, close out accounts and cards. Make sure that they are closed out. That can be very helpful, just in case, it allows you to be confident that that account is closed. Maybe you can't close off a credit card account, but you do need to get rid of it. You can cut the card and continue to watch for whatever monthly expenses are on the bill and cut those as well. Any questions? Well, I flew through those rules and kind of like these steps pretty quick. Yeah.
I also suggest to check your credit report at least like 3 times a year. The 3 credit agencies give you 1 free credit check once a year. So if you spread that between 1 every 4 months, you can check to make sure that 1, your identity is not stolen, and see if there's any outstanding debt that you may have forgotten in the past and all that stuff. So it's always a good idea just to check your credit.
It can be great, especially for like medical things. Because those bills, especially for those of us who have moved a lot recently, those bills typically come, I feel like, 6 months after you're expecting them to. There's conversation on debt. Again, if you have any questions, we'll talk a little bit afterwards, but in your personal life, like, the great thing about the family is that we can help one another. Savings, Proverbs 21:20. The wise store up choice food and olive oil, but fools gulp theirs down. Also, not sure how much olive oil you want to gulp down in general, but that's a question for another day. And I really like this proverb because it's you're storing up. You are not just spending all. You're not running through everything you have. In our case, every month. You hopefully are 1, living below your means, and 2, you have extra on top of that to start saving. And there's a couple ways and couple things in saving that can be very helpful, and that you should, I'd advise that you should do. Number 1 is an emergency fund. If you don't have an emergency fund or some money set aside that is accessible, preferably within the week, please plan to start saving for an emergency fund. Typically people say 3 to 6 months. You can extend that to 9 if you feel like you're in a spot where you might need that. I typically try to have it 6 months, but obviously with kind of the expenses up here being more, it's not there anymore. And then I'll explain another example of why our emergency fund is down even more than it was. But 3 to 6 months, if you are 2-income family, maybe you can get away with 3 months. If you're single income, it might be wise to have a 6 month because, it doesn't know how long it'll take to get a job, or everything's kind of dependent on your income. please do that. If you're in debt and you are focused on paying off your debt, I encourage 1 month of expenses saved as an emergency fund, minimum. I know Dave Ramsey just says $1,000, and that is fine if you want to go his method. I encourage 1 month of expenses, of necessary expenses, but that's my rule of thumb, not others. I wanted to say one last thing is an emergency fund is amazing because when you need it, it is there. And you should only be using it when there is an emergency, but it does bring so much peace of mind. I know in the past 2 months, we had to spend $2,000 on the car and $1,000 on a medical bill that we didn't realize. And that emergency fund is there. It's like, okay, cool, we got this. We can pay it. It's fine. Now we have to rebuild our emergency fund back up, and we'll be doing that over the next few months. But that's what it's there for. And it gives us peace of mind so that we're not always worried of like, all right, am I perfectly on top of everything? Because when an emergency does come up outside of the budget, it's there. We have it. And it's so nice. So I'll say that. I'll come back to that. All right, sinking funds. I already clicked the slide, so you guys are reading it. A sinking fund is a strategic way to save money for a specific purchase by setting aside a little bit each month. It is just a very good practice to get into, especially with larger purchases. And you more than likely might start off with just one sinking fund, but as time goes on and as you stick to a budget longer and longer and longer, you will have 6, 10, potentially 15 or 20 sinking funds going at once. Now, you might shift monies here and there, but there are oftentimes a lot of things that aren't just kind of in your monthly budget. I know personally I had the annual expenses on my budget, but I also have large purchases down at the bottom if you're looking at my kind of budget outline. Those are all sinking funds, including the emergency fund is a sinking fund where you build that up so that when it's time, you have that money ready to go. That's how you can pay for a thing like a car in cash. That's how you can pay for, maybe you do your insurance 3 months at a time or 6 months at a time. You can do that all at once. It's through building that up. So, future car, travel, holiday gifts, AAA, I don't know, whatever you need as a sinking fund, I encourage you to start looking at that in your budget. I wanted to also throw out, I don't have a slide for it because I added it in kind of last minute, this idea that the budgeting software I use, they threw out this challenge to people. And I think it was a very interesting challenge because it had great results. And through the challenge, within 34 days, the average person saved $1,000. And it was called a 34-day reset. And it's kind of reset your budget. So if you are like, you know what, I don't have any sort of emergency fund right now, I'd really encourage you to try this 34-day reset. You can go look it up online, 34-day reset YNAB. But it is really just 3 rules to follow for one month. They do 34 days just because their trial version is 34 days. So they're trying to sync it all up and be neat. But it has 3 rules. Track all of your expenses for the 34 days. Buy only the essentials. And no eating out. And so it was kind of like a very simplified budget, a simplified way to look at, your month's expenses, to try to hey, you know what? This month I'm really going to be saving. I know I've done things like this in the past where I do a no spend week or a no spend month, outside of the essentials like groceries and gas and things like that. So just a fun idea if you need something to hey, you know what? We really need to build up my emergency fund, or I need to save for something. You can do things like that. It's often kind of fun when you get other people to join with you to do it, or you're doing it with your significant other. It can be kind of challenge, and you can push each other, but also help each other when somebody wants to go buy, I don't know, Thai food or something. So, nice. All right, topic number 3. Insuring. This is the one you guys were waiting for, right? Proverbs 27:12 says, "The prudent see danger and hides himself, but the simple go on and suffer for it." I think that's a very interesting proverb to read, but also I just love it when you apply this to insurances or buying insurance, because that's exactly what's happening. There are dangers in our life. Whether that is, you being robbed, or you getting in a car accident, or you having to go on disability. There are so many things that prayerfully won't happen in our lives, but definitely can. And so insurance is a way to see the dangers ahead and to protect yourself, to not have to suffer, in a sense, double for the bad things going on. Because those bad things, you already suffer enough through them. If you're robbed, you're suffering. You just lost all your stuff, or a majority of your stuff, or whatever. Or if you get injured, you're injured. You don't also want to have to suffer financially for it. And so insurances are very vital. And, this is one of those things where, some of us typically, especially kind of the younger group, we're we'll get to figuring out our insurances. I know that's something I say often, I need to sit down and take a look at my insurances and make sure we're good. And now that's even more prevalent now that I have a mortgage. But I encourage you, don't push this off, especially for these main insurances to have. And so, first one, health, then car, renters or homeowners, disability, and life. These are kind of, I think, the main 5 insurances you should have. You can have many more. If you want specific insurances of, cancer or heart attack insurance, or maybe you got a boat and you need boat insurance. Who knows? But I just put some notes on each one. I'll run through them. With health insurance, if possible, when you have an emergency fund built up, go with a high deductible, especially if you have any sort of HSA. That's kind of typically what's really encouraged, if that's possible. Car insurance. You can have maybe a higher deductible if you have your emergency fund built up. But, with car insurances, I typically like to play around with the different coverages to see, is it worth it for me to increase my deductible by $1,000? Because sometimes it's not for the price they're offering. But please get a decent liability limit. That's just important to have something solid or decent. Don't just buy the cheapest car insurance. I guess that's my advice there. Renter's insurance, it's cheap and it's totally worth it. That renter's insurance might cost you $12 a month, maybe. And it'll protect everything you have, except maybe fine jewelry. And so, please, if you're renting in any way, even if it's not through a typical, what's the word I'm looking for? Renting situation, or if you're renting from a friend, even get it. It's cheap. It's so cheap, guys. Homeowners insurance, that's paid through your mortgage most of the times. I know Abby and I didn't really even have a choice. We had to go with the one we did because our lender made a mistake. And so we had to go with this cheapest option. But, look at it. You can always readjust any of these insurances at any time. Even if you've paid ahead with an insurance, you can actually change insurances and they will pay you the money you've already paid them back. Super weird in my mind, but super amazing that they do that. The last two, disability and life, both of these might be covered by work, but it's probably not enough. And it's helpful to have an additional insurance on these two things, especially long-term disability. Your work will give you a certain amount, but if, typically a work might give you 50% of your salary or 60% of your salary for disability for the rest of your life. But if you're looking at this, can I live off 60% of my salary for the rest of my life, ongoing? That would be really tough. I look at Abby and I like, that would be a challenge. So to have extra, especially long-term disability, because you are much more likely to somehow get disabled than to pass away in the short term. In the long term, we all know you're much more likely everyone will pass. But anyway, but life insurance, especially if you have a mortgage and or kids, even if you have just a spouse, encourage you to get life insurance. These are the things, these are the insurances you should be looking at first when you're going into it. They will try to upsell you a lot of different insurances, but I encourage you to get these 5 first, whichever homeowners or renters. Personally, I advise term life insurance. You can look at it yourself. It's just so much cheaper in the short term. And hopefully, as you save and invest, which we'll get into next week, by the time that 30-year runs out, you will be financially secure enough to buy a more expensive life policy, or even potentially just go without one. So that's all the slides I had and all the content I had. Again, we kind of are covering a lot within 3 weeks of material. And so I definitely encourage you guys to ask questions. And I feel like typically a minister wouldn't be the one presenting this, but as you guys know, I basically got a degree in finance. So it's something that's a passion of mine. So I'm super glad we're going over this stuff, and we'll talk next week. Kind of the spiritual lesson portion of next week will be, I forget what I titled it. How much can you do for God? Hopefully it'll really kind of cast this vision of, as we are better stewards, we can do so much for God and so much for his kingdom. And that really, really excites me. So let's close out. Does anybody have any questions?
I just comment on medical bills.
Yeah.
A lot of times if you just ask, you guys discount this if I pay it off right now, usually they don't never offer, but if you ask, especially Merle's company, they don't offer it. But I asked and they give me 10% off just for asking. And then there's one lab bill we had, got 30% off. And it was only $200 bill and they're giving me 30% off. So just ask, you get a lot of discount. Put down payment plans, so FYI.
Yeah. Cool. Well, your homework for tonight is, if you are in debt, to list out all your debts and to come up with a debt repayment plan. If you need help on any of that, feel free to reach out. Bruce, I, Merle, probably a lot of us could help each other out in that. And then if you are like, hey, you know what? Thankfully, I have gotten out of the debt stranglehold at times. That's what it can feel like. Look over your insurances. Make sure you have these insurances, and then if you don't, it might not be this week, but try to have it by the end of summer. Have that as a goal. Put it on your project list to start making some phone calls, getting some quotes, and really applying. And again, you'll have to budget for these things. And so as I said last week, when you make a budget, it's going to take 2, 3, 4 months to adjust and figure out, to tinker, all right, this is a good budget for us. Then on top of that, you have to add things like this into it. Like, oh, you know what, I don't have disability insurance. I need to go get that. That'll be another expense you'll have to add. So if you have any more questions, come with them next week, or really, I love this stuff. Talk to me anytime. So, cool. Let's close out with a prayer, and then we'll be done for the night. Daniel, you want to close out with a prayer? Cool.
Lord, thank you for teaching us all this, Lord. And I pray that we are able to create a budget that really suits us, and that we're able to follow, and as a result, are able to give more to you, Lord, and that we are wise with what we use the money that you've given us, Lord. I pray that we are able to just dig more and more into what we need, and just come out wisely for it, Lord. I just want to say thank you for giving us these lessons, Lord, that is something that you're typically not taught in a typical situation, Lord. So thank you so much.
Amen. All right, enjoy your evening.